Hey there, pals. It's your eternal host, Allison Dixon, back with another cool episode of Ding Dong Ditch. I'm putting heavy emphasis on the cool because this week we're talking about the practice of chasing immortality by turning corpses into popsicles. Cryonics, or the art of freezing a recently deceased corpse in liquid nitrogen in the hopes of later resurrection, is an extremely niche post-mortem pursuit, usually reserved for those whose lust for life is outmatched only by their supply of cash. But not everyone who does this is ensconced in a shiny steel chamber in a high-tech cryopreservation facility. Sometimes you can wind up in a tiny Colorado town, on a bed of dry ice, in a backyard shed, with people traveling from all over the world to attend a yearly festival thrown in your honor. You'll want to stick around for this one, folks. Afterward, maybe you can start making travel plans. The story begins in Western Norway with Bredo Morstol. Born in 1900, he was a man who, by all accounts, led a long, comfortable existence as a painter, skier, fisherman, and director of parks and recreation for his county, a sort of male Norwegian Leslie Knope, if you will. In 1989, he passed away from a heart condition, but this is where his story truly begins, because his grandson, Trygve Bauge, had other plans for Bredo. See, Trygve was not what one would call conventional. According to an article on legendsofamerica.com, he came to live in the United States in 1980 under the belief that he would be safe from nuclear war. I've been pondering this one for a minute, the things I could say about all the Russian nukes pointed right at us. But anyway, as I said, Trygve was a bit of an oddball. For instance, he loved ice diving and believed it would prolong his life. As such, he founded the Boulder chapter of the Polar Bear Club. He even broke the world record for the longest time submerged in freezing water, enduring 1 hour and 4 minutes in an icy 1,500-gallon tank. So it makes total sense that he wanted his dearly departed grandfather to be cryogenically frozen. Initially, he brought Bredo to the Trans-Time Cryonics facility in Los Angeles, where he was kept in liquid nitrogen for the next 3 years. In that time, Trygve settled in Nederland, Colorado, which is about 40 miles north of Denver, with grand plans to build a disaster-proof house. That's nuclear disaster, earthquake disaster, tornado disaster, you name it. And he wanted to start a cryonics facility of his own on the property. So his mother, Odd, eventually joined him from Norway, and the two brought Grandpa Bredo from the cryonics facility up to Nederland. He was packed on dry ice for the journey and placed in a small garden shed next to this odd castle-like edifice of a house that Trygve was building, a house that incidentally had no electricity or plumbing, and that would come back to bite them later. More on that in a moment. Trygve's visa to remain in the U.S. eventually ran out, and in 1994, he was deported back to Norway, leaving his mother to care for Grandpa. Well, I should also add, in their aim to create an actual cryonics facility, they had one other body in that shed, a fellow by the name of Al Campbell from Chicago. So here's poor Odd, hunkering down in this medieval-style house in the middle of Colorado, babysitting this makeshift cryonics shed her son built, as one does. Eventually, local authorities came sniffing around because this house, well, it wasn't to code, and it didn't have any of the proper zoning permits. As anyone who's ever tried to build a deck or a shed or so much as dig a hole on their property knows, permits are everything. So they served her with an eviction notice. And this is when Odd had to come clean about the corpse sickles in her shed. As you can imagine, the public response to this was a little vigorous. Media and police descended on the town, and people were initially horrified. They wanted the bodies out of there. And the family of Al Campbell did in fact recover his body and eventually had it cremated. As for Odd, she was found guilty for living in a building that was improperly coded and zoned, and she was ultimately deported in 1995. The town also passed an emergency ordinance stating that it was illegal to, and I quote, have the whole or any part of a person, body, or carcass of a human being or animal or other biological species which is not alive on one's property. That would seem to dot and cross every I and T, I suppose. However, Trygve was not giving up the fight for his grandpa, and he wasn't about to let being halfway around the world stop him. So, thanks to his many appeals to people in the cryogenics community, and thanks to the extraordinary media coverage this case garnered, the town council of Nederland eventually agreed to allow Grandpa Bredo to remain in the shed. He was grandfathered in, as it were. In that same year, the company Tough Shed and a local radio station arranged for the donation of a new and improved building to house Bredo's body. Over the years since, Trygve has entrusted a few different people with the job of maintaining his grandfather's chilly disposition. Bo Schaefer, aka the Iceman, was an environmental specialist who once a month hauled 1,600 pounds of dry ice to pack into Bredo's sarcophagus of aluminum, foam, wood, and blankets. The job has changed hands a few times since then and is currently the responsibility of Nederland resident Brad Wickham. The caretakers have also given various filmmakers and even psychics the opportunity to visit the shed. According to those who commune with the dead, Bredo seems fine with the whole thing, which is good, if a little convenient. But the town of Nederland wasn't content with quietly tending the icy grave of its infamous resident. And besides, that 1,600 pounds of dry ice a month isn't exactly cheap, so it behooves the citizens to get creative, hence the annual celebration known as Frozen Dead Guy Days. Usually taking place in the second weekend of March, the festival attracts upwards of 25,000 morbidly jovial and curious folks from all around the world to Nederland, where they participate in all sorts of fun events like a coffin race and a hearse parade. You can also stick around for the craft vendors, the frozen turkey bowling, a poetry slam, a Grandpa Bredo look-alike contest, and a dance called Grandpa's Blue Ball. So they definitely take full advantage of the dark humor here. And much of the money raised at the event helps the town and goes toward Grandpa's maintenance. But this isn't so much a charity event. It's fascinating on both a cultural and human level. In a society that is largely death averse, here we have thousands of people coming together not only to help maintain the unusual state of this dead person, but to acknowledge him in his dead state and celebrate him as a de facto member of this community. This frozen dead guy who's just hanging out in a shed. But are they embracing death here? Or do they see Grandpa Bredo as existing in a sort of liminal space between life and eternity? Because what is the point of cryopreservation if not even the most distant glimmer of the hope for resurrection? Does the celebration of and interaction with Grandpa Bredo's frozen corpse do more to exacerbate Western society's avoidant approach to death? Now, I'll get into that for a moment here. Death avoidance is a topic for a whole other episode of this show, and trust me, it's gonna happen someday. But if you're doubtful about your own death aversion, ask yourself the following questions. Do you have a will, and or have you made arrangements for your death? Have you openly spoken to your loved ones about your wishes for the disposal of your corpse, or sat comfortably and listened while another family member expressed these wishes to you? Have you ever taken a highly active role in the care for a dead loved one, from washing and dressing their body for the burial or cremation, or forgoing embalming in favor of greener options, or even simply accompanying them to the crematory and pushing the button to send their casket into the flames of the retort? Many of these rituals are common all over the world, but in Western culture, these things are often viewed unfavorably or with very deep unease, with a very high dollar funeral industry actively vested in putting a wall between you and these practices, keeping the taboo of death alive and well, and extending the grieving process for countless millions of families. So again, I ask, is keeping someone on ice a way of accepting or denying their actual death? The answer seems pretty obvious to me, especially when one considers another unusual death practice, one that also happens to take place exclusively in Colorado. Maybe there's something special in that Rocky Mountain air. Anyway, roughly 150 miles southwest of Colorado Springs lies the town of Crestone, which is the site of the Crestone End of Life Project, the site of the only legal open-air funeral pyre in the country. The organization actually operates 2 pyres in the Centennial State, but regulations are incredibly strict. It's only for Crestone residents or landowners, and they're limited to performing only a dozen cremations per year. As for the rest of the United States, only Maine has made a move to add allowances for open-air pyres to their books. So in the realm of unusual death rituals, Colorado remains supreme, at least for now. But comparing this to the frozen dead guy, one could easily enough surmise what happens in Crestone involves more of a direct confrontation with the finality of death. The rending of a person to ash in view of onlookers will definitely do that. But back to the cryonics. Because the ultimate aim of people who do this, and this was Tryggve's aim for his grandfather, is the possibility of future resurrection, which is nothing if not a giant frozen middle finger raised at the Grim Reaper. Otherwise, you would simply bury or burn your body as most people do. Unfortunately for Grandpa, being packed on dry ice is considered a substandard form of cryopreservation. While the temperatures are suitable enough to keep him from decomposing, the temperatures are just too low to prevent the formation of ice crystals in his organs. No one will likely be attempting to revive him one day, thereby permanently casting him in this odd role of quirky town novelty. And I'll leave the ethics of all that up to you guys to discuss. Now, in all of this, I haven't really talked much about the legitimacy of cryopreservation itself. I've only mentioned it's attractive to a particular subset of those with the right mix of wealth and vanity due to its prohibitive costs. Hence why such high-profile figures like baseball player Ted Williams and his son John Henry opted for it, and why PayPal founders Luke Nosek and Peter Thiel have made similar arrangements. Actually, Jeffrey Epstein wanted to do this as well, apparently with the intent to help sow the future human race with his DNA, but something tells me those wishes were not honored, and I think I'm okay with that. But is there any chance in frozen hell that the few hundred corpses that are currently soaking in liquid nitrogen in the United States will ever be revived? According to the overwhelming consensus of the scientific community, no. The problems with the procedure are many. While it's possible to cryogenically freeze things like sperm or other cells, as well as human embryos, when it comes to large organs like brains, livers, and lungs, the freezing process, called vitrification, risks fracturing them and damaging them beyond repair. There are various cryoprotectants one can use in the process, which would prevent cell shrinkage and problems with salt concentrations and all that. They fix the organs in place and make them appear biologically perfect in even electron microscopes. Essentially, it's embalming them. The only problem is these chemicals are so toxic that the organs lose any chance at remaining biologically viable. And here's the problem with cryopreserving the human brain. There are so many different areas of it that each require different protocols of preservation that there's simply no way to do it without severely impairing its function. Assuming you could break all odds and scientific barriers and revive a person who's been cryogenically frozen, the chances of them having full brain function seems about as likely as throwing a dart in New York and having it hit a bullseye in Shanghai. And this is even before considering you'd have to still reverse the actual cause of the person's death. So this isn't merely pie in the sky thinking. This is someone using their immense riches to pay for the fairy tale of having a team of servants long after they depart the mortal realm. But here's the thing. It's a risky gamble, not only from a biological standpoint, but on the basis of the capitalistic values that enrich these people in the first place. Corporations typically have a much shorter lifespan than humans. In fact, I believe I read a statistic that said 1 in 1,000 corporations have a chance of surviving even a full century. And there are only 4 facilities in the world dedicated to the storage of cryogenically frozen corpses, 3 in the US and 1 in Russia. But many more such facilities have gone tits up over the years, and those corpses have since been buried or cremated. However, maybe that's part of the allure for these folks. The same mentality that draws people to become pioneers of new lands or even new planets, as the people who signed up to be on Elon Musk's Mars colony years ago were aiming to do. The certainty of success is slim, but in the off chance you could wake up from a very cold nap centuries from now, it would be worth it to them. And if it never happens, they will likely never know because they're dead. So it's a win-win, right? Who knows? But all ethics and legal issues aside, we're speaking from what we know in 2022. If you're sitting in the 1950s and someone postulated we could map the entire human genome, you might think that person was a little eccentric, right? But we did do that. And we've gone on to do so much more in the realm of genetics since. Add in the increasing advances in areas of artificial intelligence and quantum computing, the path to immortality might not lie so much in the freezing of your biological meat sack, but in uploading your consciousness to a simulation. One startup company called Nectome is researching various ways of preserving human brains through vitrifixation, which is something I explained a little bit ago. And they're also learning how to use this process to find out how memories are encoded and then extract them. It reads a little like science fiction, but not terribly distant science fiction. In fact, the theory that we're already living in a simulation is in wide circulation, but I'll leave that rabbit hole for another episode. So what do you think about cryonics? Personally, I think it's taking a bold leap into a potentially unknown and terrifying future where you could be successfully resurrected in a lab only to find the identity you died with has zero context for the world you woke up in. And would you even be free to go? Or would you essentially be consigned to living as a lab rat in a future that might have a very different concept of ethics and morality? Admittedly, my speculations on the future of humanity often trend toward the dystopian, but I think I'll just go ahead and sum up my thoughts by cribbing a line from my favorite Stephen King novel, Pet Sematary. Sometimes dead is better. Though I suppose Grandpa Bredo is doing okay for himself up in Nederland. And with that, I'll go ahead and bring this episode of Ding Dong Ditch to a close with nothing but warm regards for my listeners, in particular author Ian Healy, one of my dearest friends and Colorado resident who gave me the idea for this episode. If you liked it, leaving reviews on iTunes really does a lot to keep the show alive. While I do sometimes wish I could have a whole extra lifetime to absorb all the knowledge and do all the things I dream of doing, I take heart in the notion that at least my words will be preserved both here and in print for a short time, perhaps even a few years after my oversized flesh suit has been consigned back to the earth for consumption and recycling. As for ice, I'll save it for my cocktails and frozen desserts, the stuff that makes life, for however long we have it, a little sweeter. Because that's what matters, doesn't it? Not so much the number of years, but the way we spend them. Or the mileage, as Indiana Jones put it. I'll be returning soon for another short dive into the realm of the weird, but in the meantime, be good, you little ding-dongs.